In Dynasty, it's really easy to just move on from players that didn't immediately capitalize when there was hype around them, right? Every season, these players get steamed up in rankings, redraft, whatever. And sometimes, a lot of times, guys do not meet expectations right away. That's all right. I want to look at 3 post-hype sleepers that I'm looking to add to my Dynasty teams right now. At the quarterback position, nobody screams post-hype sleeper more than Bryce Young. Last season, he had a startup ADP of QB 15. Now, he is going as the QB 23. Say what you want about Bryce Young. He is still a first-round NFL draft pick, and he just wasn't put in a good situation last year. I mean, just going down the list here, right? You have a head coach that did not want him in Frank Reich. And then Frank Reich got fired. Not helpful whatsoever. They had a terrible, terrible offensive line, right? That amounted to the second most sacks in the NFL. And yes, obviously some of that is still on Bryce Young. Like, he is not without blame here. But offensively, it was not a great situation. The line, like I said, is bad. The receivers could not have been worse. I mean, you're looking at Jonathan Mingo, Adam Thielen, who was still productive, but I mean, these guys are just not getting open for a quarterback. That's just the truth. Like, they are not NFL caliber route runners at this point, right? The separation was non-existent for this team. All around, it was just the worst thing that could happen to a rookie quarterback. Like, he was just kind of thrown into the fire. Year 2 feels different. Year 2 feels like the Panthers, for all their flaws, have made some massive upgrades in their problem areas from last year. From the coaching perspective, they hire Dave Canales. Now, I don't know if he's a good head coach. I like to think he's going to be the moves they've made in the offseason have been helpful. And honestly, Dave Canales getting the first 4,000-yard season in Baker's career, getting him to throw a career high in touchdowns as well, that has to count for something, right? I think Bryce Young is going to be in significantly better hands than he was last year. Aside from that, they also addressed a massive hole in this offensive line. They go out and sign Damian Lewis. They sign Robert Hunt, 2 guards that they may or may not have overpaid, but they solidify the interior of this offensive line. And given that Bryce Young is like 5'1", having a solid offensive line, especially on the interior, is going to be key. So that is just, I think, a good way to spend money. If you're going to overpay, have it be a position of need, something that you desperately need to fix. And then on the outside, they did not stand pat, right? They go out and they trade for Deontay Johnson, who is basically the antithesis of the receivers last season. Deontay Johnson is one of the best route runners in the NFL. Hands down. Production aside last year, Deontay is open time and time again. He gives them a new structure to this offense. He should immediately come in and be the wide receiver 1 because he's the best route runner. He's going to be open the most often. And then on top of that, right, they go and they draft Xavier Leggett, who, for whatever you think, they're making changes to the wide receiver room. I don't know if he's the solution, but it's a step in the right direction. Overall, you look at Bryce Young and think, it's probably not as bad as last year. And I think realistically, if you bought into him coming out of college like I did, looking at what's there in year 2 for him, if he's really the guy or can be the guy, the situation is now set up for him to at least take a step forward and then gain more dynasty value. That's what I'm looking at with Bryce Young. I'm in for the price currently, and I think we might look back a year from now and say QB 23 was probably his floor. At least that's the hope. On the other end of the spectrum, we have a proven wide receiver, and that's Tee Higgins, right? Tee Higgins now off the board as wide receiver 23. 2 years ago, he was being drafted as a top 10 wide receiver. He was the wide receiver 9 in startup ADP. And, I mean, it made sense because he was tied to Joe Burrow. He had fantastic production. And then 2022 and 2023 happened, where you just have not seen Tee Higgins fully healthy, right? He's only played 21 games, over 60% of snaps. That's not enough. It's just not. It's very difficult to be considered an elite wide receiver or a borderline elite wide receiver when you're not playing as often as you should, or you're leaving games early consistently. That's the problem with Tee Higgins. And it also doesn't help that his quarterback's been injured. All around, the situation has not been kind to Tee Higgins. But when he does play over 60% of snaps over the last 2 seasons, he averages 16 points per game. It's not a skill issue. Like, Tee Higgins, when he's on the field, is dominant. He is a borderline wide receiver 1. hands down. And the thing with Tee Higgins is it feels like he's older. I don't know why. It feels like Tee Higgins should be 27. He's not. He's 25 years old for the entire 2024 season. Tee Higgins is not near the end of his career. He's just starting to fade in Dynasty because we're reactionary. People are very reactionary. If you don't produce like we expect you to do, there's almost always a ding. And he had back-to-back down seasons. That's enough for people to say, yeah, you're not a wide receiver one. And look, he shouldn't be ranked as a wide receiver one. I think the price is fair. It's just that when I can get a guy of his caliber as the wide receiver 23, I'm going to pull the trigger. I think it just makes too much sense. And when we look forward, he's probably out of Cincinnati after this year, and that means he gets paid. He has a chance to be a true number one wide receiver. Maybe he ends up with Drake May in New England, right? Him and Jalen Polk, I think, would be an interesting duo. So, look, he's not in this situation forever. If he can string together a healthy season, Tee Higgins is going to look like a discount next year. Our final, deep dive here is going to be Jaxon Smith Njigba, and I've talked about him as a rebuilding trade target back in May. He goes from the wide receiver 16 in his rookie year to the wide receiver 30 in startup ADP. And honestly, I feel like he did what a lot of us expected him to do. If he doesn't break his hand, he's probably over 800 yards in his rookie year. He puts up a 17% target share, very modest, but what else was the expectation here? Obviously, he's alongside DK Metcalf. He's alongside Tyler Lockett. I think it was just people put too lofty of expectations, and now we're readjusting. And I think that's fine. I still think Jaxon Smith Njigba is a very talented player. When you look at his route running from last year, 70th percentile versus man, 76th versus zone, 60th versus press coverage. Now, that's not elite, but that is a well above average wide receiver. He's not, there's not a weak spot to his game. And now when you look forward to 2024 and beyond, Tyler Lockett's a year older, coming off of his lowest target share since 2019. He is trending in the wrong direction because, look, Father Time's undefeated. He's going to continue to get older. Jaxon Smith Njigba, his role is going to continue to grow. Now, I don't think we get superstardom out of JSN this year. I think that would be an insane expectation with a new offensive coordinator, a new head coach. Geno Smith is what he is at this point as well. So it may not be, all, sunshine and roses here or whatever the hell the saying is for Jaxon Smith Njigba in 2024. But I don't think wide receiver 30 is going to be his price next year. I think that is going to rise. I think we're going to just sort of balance between wide receiver 16, wide receiver 30. He's going to have plenty of great games. But Jaxon Smith Njigba is well on his way to having a 20% target share this year, I think. And that is going to be enough to look at the peripherals and say, yep, he should be closer to a wide receiver 2 than he is to the end of the wide receiver 3s. And before I get out of here, I want to do 3 quick hitters. The first one being Greg Dulcich. I know Addison has talked about him as well. He's only 24 years old. He has minimal target competition, and he is a freak athlete. Those are the things I want in my upside tight ends. Tight end 34 right now in ADP. The post hype is real with Greg Dulcich. Next, quickly, Josh Downs. You guys know I'm a massive, massive fan of Josh Downs. The situation is not his friend. They bring in Adonai Mitchell. You have Anthony Richardson under center. It's not great, but the player, Josh Downs, is a damn good player. 93rd percentile win rate versus man, 82nd percentile versus zone. You can move him all over. I think right now it may be a little bit ugly, but the player is good, and those are the kind of guys I like to buy in for cheap. And to close us out, Wan'Dale Robinson, 2 years removed from an ACL tear now. He's the wide receiver 2. He should be the second option behind Malik Neighbors. He's cheap. He may just be a volume play, but I think ultimately he's an interesting player who had a good rookie season before he got hurt. And now we might get to see what he can actually do in year 3.